Hello and welcome to Life and Whiskey. I'm Jordan and today I'm going to relay some of my elk hunting stories as we get into video number 1 of my elk hunting series here. And today we're going to be drinking Evan Williams Green Label. I'm going to quickly go through some of the tasting and review of this whiskey, and then we'll get into the stories, and I'll probably be drinking the whiskey as I'm telling my stories here. But yeah, let's get into the whiskey first. So let's pour us a little glass of this here. And there we go. So Evan Williams, it is a brand under the Heaven Hill distillery. And let's see here. Let's talk about the whiskey first. So the whiskey, the Green Label, it's their budget lineup. It's a 40% ABV whiskey. It's aged a minimum of 4 years. It's a no age statement whiskey. And the mash bill for this, as with most of the Evan Williams lineup, is 75% corn, 13% rye, and 12% barley. As I said, it's a Heaven Hill product, and it's made at the old Evan Williams distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky. Now, Heaven Hill might have overstated some of its history. Now, it says that the distillery was started in 1783 by Evan Williams himself, but history, especially some of that that was dug up by Michael Veach, shows that that is probably impossible, as he was still in London at the time and didn't actually leave until 1794. And there are maybe some other overstated claims by Heaven Hill about the Evan Williams distillery, but none of that really matters. All that matters is that it's a Heaven Hill product, and some of the other brands that you might recognize under the Heaven Hill name are Elijah Craig, Pikesville Rye, Larceny, Heaven Hill itself, Henry McKenna, Rittenhouse Rye, Old Fitzgerald, and Mellow Corn. And that's just some of their lineup. So it's a pretty big distillery, and yeah, that's probably all you really need to know about that. Anyway, so 40% with 40% ABV. Evan Williams you'll find, and I'm going to be pairing the Evan Williams lineup with all of this information about elk hunting. So this bottle, so nice, it's their budget line, and I picked it up for $7.89. Doesn't get much more budget than that, and it's pretty delicious for the price that you're actually paying. You know, it's a bourbon. It's kind of right down the middle. It has all the notes that you would expect from a bourbon. It has the corn dust I pick up. Now, to me, all the Evan Williams products have a heavy cherry nose, and I don't find that in a lot of the other bourbons. But it is, according to other people, it's a very common note, but Evan Williams definitely has a cherry smell to it. It's pretty good in there. A little bit of oak, nice and light. Now, I find the cherry heavy forward on the taste as well. It moves into this like coating, coats my mouth. It's oily, kind of moves through. I get the oak secondary pushing into the finish. A little bit of brown sugar and dark fruit notes in there. But it's just cherry and corn and a little bit of oak. That's what's dominating the flavor profile for me. It's almost like a medicinal cherry, like cherry cough syrup, but in a good way. It has a sweet characteristic to it. I think for the price, you know, as a budget whiskey, it's a great intro. Yes, it's only 40%. It's a little bit thin. The finish is short, has a little bit of a spike to the end, a little black pepper note at the end. But it's really quite good. For $7.89, there's only a handful of other whiskeys that I could even throw into that category. So go ahead, give yourself you know, the opportunity to go out and try this, is what I'd like to say. Okay, so there's my whiskey review. Evan Williams, Green Label. Go out, try it, check it out. And like I said, I'm going to be going through the Evan Williams lineup as I go through this series, and I'll be sipping on this while I'm sitting here telling my stories. So, for those of you who are new to elk hunting, looking to just get into it, I myself have only been doing this for a couple of years now, so I'm not the end-all be-all of knowledge by any stretch of the imagination. For instance, it took me 5 years personally holding a tag to actually get my first elk. And that was after, or that included 6 years in total of actual elk hunting. 1 year I did not hold a tag. I was helping my dad out. And I'm going to run through some stories and the mistakes that were made along the way and see if maybe I can impart some knowledge and show some of the mistakes we made and see if hopefully you won't make those mistakes as well. So my journey started in 2011 actually, when I told my father that I'm going to buy you an elk tag. We've been talking about it when I was a kid. You know, I always heard stories like, yeah, someday we're going to do this. Someday we're going to do this. So in 2011, I was old enough. I, was out of college, had a little bit of money, said, I'm going to do this for you. Your job is you get in shape. We're going elk hunting this fall. So in 2012, some guys that my dad worked with were going out elk hunting. We all put in together as a group for the draw in Colorado for the first season rifle tag, and which I want to say was like the second week of October, and we went out elk hunting. Now, being new, what do you do? Well, first thing we did, which is a complete mistake, do not do this. We went out and we bought all kinds of gear because we thought we had to have all this gear. And number two was, oh, we're going out in the mountains. Now, I grew up in Wisconsin. There's no mountains there. So the idea of mountains were intimidating and, oh, we got to have all this support gear and all this stuff. First mistake was with all that gear on my back. I think the very first day we set foot out into the mountains to go hunting, I had at least 35 or 40 pounds in my pack total. Do not do that. You don't need to do that. You don't need all that stuff. Now, as the day went on, that first day hunting, I realized that half the gear that I had, I didn't need. At no point in time were we so far away from camp that we couldn't actually get back if we needed to. This is all situational dependent, but for us, I made the assessment. We came back to camp and we ripped apart our packs and we cut our load in half. So the first mistake was way too heavy of a pack, way too much gear. Now, it snowed, it went from 60 or 70 degrees to snow in 2 days. Now, that is not uncommon out in the mountains. You get huge temperature swings, you get huge weather swings. So yes, it's important that you have gear that can, some kind of clothing that can handle all types of situations that may arise. But most of the time, elk hunting, if you're not stationary and glassing, you're going to be moving. So most of the time, cold is not the factor that you're going to have to deal with, especially early in the season. If you're sitting around glassing, then being cold is a real consideration, so you're probably going to have to layer up. But most of the time, you're going to be moving, and so you can get away with a lot less clothing on your body. Now, you might want to have extra gear in your pack, and because of that, you're going to want to get as light of clothing as you can for a reasonable amount of money. But yeah, in 2012, that first hunt, out of shape, or not in as good a shape as I thought, even though I was much younger, and didn't really know what to expect. The people we were hunting with, several of them had hunted before and kind of had an idea, and they had set up this expectation that all you need to do is find a park, an open area, and set up and wait for the elk to come through, kind of like what we would do for deer hunting in Wisconsin. After a day of that, I realized that that is foolish. To me, I want to find the elk and go make a plan and then go after them. I don't want to wait for luck to happen my way and have an animal run through a meadow that I don't know if they're actually even visiting. And if they do run through that meadow, chances are it's because they got bumped by a hunter. So it's pure luck if that situation happens. That's not how I do it. So 4 days of hunting, 8 guys. I was the only person to even see an elk. I was 2 miles deep on the last day of hunting. It had snowed 8 inches. I was sliding down the side of a mountain, literally going down a old logging trail. I met an elk face to face on a bench about 60 yards apart, and I saw him at the same time he saw me. I raised up with my gun, and when I got my gun right about here, so not even to shooting, but here, he bolted, gone. I trailed him for a mile and a half and never was able to get within a reasonable distance. I never saw him again. Now, I also, another mistake, wind. At this point in my elk hunting career, wind was not a factor. I never thought about wind. And that is something that I learned more about the more I got into it. And you'll find that that is a big, big, big part of elk hunting. So that was year 1, right? So learned a little bit, found some mistakes in what I was doing, revamped. 2013, nothing. 2014, moved to Montana. So now I moved to northwest Montana up in the Kalispell area there. And I was working back in North Dakota in the oil field. And so the job I had allowed, it was 2 weeks on, 1 week off. So I thought, great, I'm going to go out, I'm going to elk hunt here. I got a full week. I can go out and hunt. So I transitioned through archery season and into rifle season for that 2014 season. And I never saw an elk. I quickly learned that um, the elk densities in that particular area were really low. I didn't venture out into the state very far because I had a limited time. With a week off, you really had a day of travel to, a day of travel from, a day of adjusting to actually being able to sleep and catching up on bills and doing all that stuff. So when it came down to it, I really had 3 days to go elk hunting, 2 weeks apart. And that 2 weeks apart is a big deal because of how things in the woods change as you progress through September into October into November and then finally into December. The habits of elk change and where they're found, or the locations on the mountain change. I was oblivious to all that stuff at the time. So 2014, all I learned was northwest Montana is incredibly thick. There's a boatload of grizzly bears around the Flathead Valley, and elk numbers are incredibly low. So needless to say, I didn't really get out and successfully do anything. Okay, so that took us into 2015. So 2015, I ended up moving into Washington, so I bought all my licenses for Montana before I moved, so that way I could still hunt in Montana. We moved to Spokane, so it was only an hour's drive from Spokane, Washington to the Montana border, across the Panhandle there on I-94, and so I spent a fair bit of time in Montana. Now, as luck would have it, I did not have to have a job that fall. So I was fortunate enough to spend 45 days out in the mountains of southwest Montana and really interact with elk, and I learned a lot. So for opening weekend, I went with a buddy of mine who was a former elk guide into the area where he used to guide, and he kind of briefly showed me a couple of things about how to find some elk and how to call and some basic strategies and stuff like that. We did end up seeing elk, but we never were able to get a response to any of the calls, and we never were able to make a play on anything. So then I kind of took what I learned there, and I went to a different location that was closer to the border so that I could get there faster and spend more time hunting. And I would go for like a week at a time because I didn't have to be back. I didn't have any problems. And so like I said, all said and done, I ended up spending 45 days on the mountain. Now, most people, 45 days is several years of hunting, and I get it. I get that most people can't do that. And I was incredibly fortunate, but even with that, I still was unable to fill my tag in 45 days. Okay, some of that was bad luck, some of that was not knowing anything and being ignorant, but it was all learning. Okay, so I started an archery season. I, picked, basically threw a dart at the map and said, that's where I'm going elk hunting. I showed up, I drove there on opening weekend, and I got there and there were camps. I didn't get there till like 11 o'clock at night. There were camps all the way up the mountain as I'm driving up this mountain road. And there's campfires going and whatever else. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Finally get up to like almost the top, like the high point of this road. And I'm beat. I'm tired. I'm like, screw it. Pulling over. This is where I'm going to hunt. So I pull over, like basically bury my truck into the woods and just go, yep, this is where I'm sleeping. So crash in the back of the truck. And at 4:30, I'm awoken by a bugle 200 yards, 300 yards from the truck. I go, oh man, game on. Quick, get up, throw all my gear on, pack up, go. And by 5 o'clock, I am hitting the trail. And I'm following this herd of elk bugle in the dark, bugling, going up this mountain. And I finally laid eyes on the elk at like 9:30 that morning. And that was the first time that I was able to call, respond, get in and around elk. But I didn't really call very much. So one of the things I learned was how much noise I could make, how fast I needed to move, and how much I could call. So as a whitetail hunter from the Midwest, I always thought move slow, be quiet, and calling is kind of like a last ditch effort. Not so with elk hunting. You need to move fast, noise be damned, don't worry about it. You don't want to go out of your way to be kicking rocks and whatever else in most situations, but if you do, it's not the end of the hunt by any stretch. Most of the time, especially if you're calling elk, just think that it's another elk, because elk are extremely loud when they move through the woods. So that was one of the lessons I learned. Calling. I didn't hardly call at all. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. So I would call and I got response. Sorry about that. I had to go answer the door real quick. So anyways, this elk goes back behind this tree, and when he does, I draw. So I draw, and all that comes out on the other side of this tree is his head and neck. He never steps forward giving me that shot. So I'm at full draw, and I'm holding as he's sitting there looking and looking and looking. He turns around, walks back behind that tree. I'm still at full draw. I'm following him. He finally gets to a spot where he's broadside to me, and I got a shooting window about this big through a treetop. And I look through it, and at 9 yards, all I could see is the body of an elk. I can't see where on that elk I am with my pin. And I end up taking the shot. I shoot him just a smidge further back than I would have liked, but it still ended up being a good shot. I caught him through the lungs and the diaphragm and out. And he only went about 60 yards and expired. And when I got up to him, he was still up, so I ended up putting a couple more arrows into him as he was sitting up, just because my philosophy is you shoot until they're dead. Same with a rifle, same with a bow. It doesn't matter. If you got a good shooting opportunity, you take it. You already got one arrow in the animal in this instance. You just keep going until that animal expires, because if not, you risk that animal getting back up, even if it's against the odds, and taking off. And elk can move a long distance in a short period of time, even if they're wounded, and that's not a situation you really want. So I ended up getting my first elk. It was a small 220-inch 6-point bull. Lessons I learned. So from 2017 to 18, I put pretty much all my time that year into shooting my bow almost every single day. I watched and learned how to elk call, what the sounds meant. This is where Chris Rowe comes in. I watched a lot of his videos. I subscribed to his webpage, Roe Hunting Resources, the elk module. I went through all that information. I learned a lot. I also learned how to play the wind, how to pay attention to the wind, and how big of a deal the wind actually was. Um, that had messed up a lot of my hunts beforehand, and so that was something else that I really learned. And finally, I learned how big of a chore it is to pack an elk out by yourself. Is it impossible? No. I'm a small guy. I'm 175 pounds, 5'10". I'm not a bulk of muscle. Um, it took me 3 hours to quarter the elk in 90-degree heat. I had to hang it overnight and cool it because I hunted all day in that heat. I was exhausted by the time I got my 1/4 out um, to the road, and I learned a lot about packing and physical strength and what it takes to actually get the job done. And it's there's a lot to do there. Is it impossible? No. Should it scare you off? No. But you need to be in shape. You need to. I had a short pack out. It was 1.5 miles, mostly downhill, and it still took a lot out of me. So I think that that's something um, that you should definitely consider. All right. So finally, that takes us to this last fall, 2019. Um, After my experience in 2018 of getting my first bull, I was like, man, I got to get my wife in on this. She needs to at least experience the calling, what it feels like to have an elk just ripping a bugle off feet away from you. Kind of the interaction of how you can call and how the animals respond and what you can do. So we went out once again, opening weekend this year, to the same location. Um, Felt pretty confident in the area. We went out, and right away, opening morning, 5 minutes into the first hunt, I had a cow and a calf and a spike standing 30 and 40 yards from me. And I was still of the mindset of any elk, minus the calf. Any adult elk I was going to take. And sitting there watching them, it was a 30-yard or a 40-yard shot to the spike. And I thought, you know what? There was a herd bull bugling. A really nice herd bull bugling. Only, I don't know, another 100 yards into the woods. I decided to pass that shooting opportunity and try and get that herd bull. That didn't work out for us. Um, we ended up going up the mountain, losing the herd. We blew up the herd once. We had a spike come in around us, catch our wind, and then go back into the main herd and blow up all the animals. So that didn't really work out in our favor. And yeah, there's just things happen. So then on day 2, we get in a similar situation. This time we got the herd bull kind of standing in one spot and displaying, trying to call calls to him, cows to him. I stupidly messed up, got into a bugling standoff with him. That didn't work out. He takes the herd. They go up to the top of the ridge. We go up there. Herd blows up again on us. Again, an animal that we didn't see ran back into the herd. So we decided to give them a rest, went down the ridge to explore some new country. So always, whenever something goes wrong, take advantage of the time you now have. If you don't think you can get right back on that herd and follow them, give them an opportunity to wind down and go and explore some new territory, learn some new trails or topography or whatever about the area where you're at. Maybe you'll find a new bedding area or a new water source or something else that will be valuable to you. So that's what we did. We went and explored some new terrain. waited for the wind to settle down, stop swirling, and be more consistent. Then we came in on the back side of their bedding area, using the wind to our advantage, and just slowly started to cow call as we were walking. As we got into a location, all of a sudden this calf fires up and is coming right at us and mewing, going meow, 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 about that fast. And he comes running in to about 5 yards from us. And we don't move. We have wind in our favor. He doesn't know we're there. And he just keeps calling. Then, like a minute or two later, bull bugles off about 75 yards from us. So now we got a situation where we got a calf where he can't smell us, and we got a bull where he can't smell us, although the wind's quartering that direction, but not enough that he'd be able to catch our scent. So we got lucky, but we had a live calf doing all the calling for us and an elk responding. So within 2 minutes of that situation, that bull walked out in front of me at 22 yards. Clean shot. We were set up perfect. Nice broadside shot. Pull him right through the lungs. Went another, again, 60 yards down. And we packed him out. And so now, 2 years in a row, I've managed to fill my tag. It was a Raghorn 5-point. Smaller than my first bull, but I'm pretty opportunistic. I don't really care much about antlers. I mean, if I saw a giant bull, like if I would have got a shot at the first bull, he was a 300-inch bull, which we learned as we were quartering out the elk that I had just shot. I was lifting up the leg and cutting, and I looked up, and that 300-inch bull was standing there, broadside 25 yards from me, just kind of moving on through. Upwind from us, so he had no clue we were there, and you know, it was a learning lesson. It was a very nice bull. Had I had an opportunity at that guy, yes, I would have taken it undoubtedly. But I'm looking at meat for the freezer, and so that is something that I have no problem doing. Is taking whatever shooting opportunity is afforded to me. And so my wife got to experience all that. She got to see the shot. She got to see what it was like to have an elk that close to her. And thankfully, thanks to her, she packed out a quarter as well, which she did a great job, and made the trip just that much easier on me, not having to pack out all the meat myself. So I encourage everybody, go out there and learn from some of those mistakes that I made. But put some effort into watching the people that I've described, and that their channels are in the links, are in the description below. Watch some of their videos. They're invaluable as far as what you can learn. I mean, there's wind, calling, setups, gear, all that type of stuff are things that will help you out undoubtedly. And the more effort you put into learning that stuff now, so it is the end of February right now, start learning now. If you're going to be doing an archery hunt and calling, start learning to call now. If now's the time to start getting in shape. Now's the time to start trying on new gear and buying gear in preparation for this fall. Start doing all that stuff, and you too can be successful. Again, I'm not the end all be all of knowledge here. I'm not thumping my chest and saying, hey, you got to do it this way. This is just my experience. Hopefully this year I'll get lucky for a third time in a row, and maybe I'll start to feel a little bit better about myself if I can fill a tag 3 times. I might start to think I have something semi figured out. But it's great fun. It's a good learning experience, and don't let it be too intimidating. You can do it on a shoestring budget if you need to, and still have a really good time and be successful. So hopefully you enjoyed some of those stories, and drop a comment below, like, subscribe, please. I'm trying to build this channel. If there's any questions you have about any of those stories, or you want some more detail or whatever, please put that in the comments below. I'd be happy to share more with you. And yeah, anyways, go out, try yourself some Evan Williams Green Label if it's available in your area. It's an easy sipper, nice, cheap, budget-friendly whiskey, and enjoy your day, and thanks for watching. Sorry about that. The camera program here on my computer decided to close down on me, so yay for computer problems. I'm not a big fan of technology. But anyways, back to it. 2005. So calling. I started to learn a little bit about calling and how effective it could be, and I called some animals into me, but did not really fully understand wind and how to set up and how to move. So I ended up blowing most of the encounters I had, and every morning the routine was kind of the same. I'd get up, get on this elk herd, mess around with them as they were kind of laying around, lounging around in a staging area about halfway up the mountain, and then by 9 o'clock, as the sun started to peek over the mountain, they made their way up to the very top of the mountain, which was about 1,200 vertical feet from where I was camped. So every morning, I'd cover that 1,200 vertical feet. Kind of beat me down pretty quick, but I learned where they were bedded. I blew them out of their bedding area a couple of times, but the elk really never left the area, and I was incredibly lucky for that. So for about 3 days, I was able to really play with them. And this is during archery season, so this is September. Um, and finally, on the last day when I went to, I kind of felt like I was sort of figuring it out. I started to go in there. It's 4:30. I'm packing in, starting to get in the dark, and I hear some four-wheelers ripping up the road. They dive off the road right at my jumping off point, illegally going off road, getting back in there about half a mile. And so I kind of dogged. I saw the guys go up there, and I thought, okay, well, I know what the elk are doing. I'm just going to cut them off, get in there, know where I'm going, all this stuff, know the quickest routes to get up the mountain. Yeah, those guys pushed that entire elk herd up over the mountain to the backside, which had no access point. The closest you could get was about 3 miles from a logging road on the backside. And so I was kind of ticked off. I left, went back home, all in a tizzy, and waited until the next week to come back, which was the beginning of rifle season. Rifle season, I thought, okay, I know where this elk herd was. Let's just go back over there. So I went back to the same spots. I saw, opening morning, I saw a cow and a calf that I jumped as they were returning to their bedding area from feeding. And the only shooting opportunity I had was this calf. And at this point, mind you, I'm looking for any legal elk I can get. I'm not being picky. I just want to punch my tag for the first time. And I saw a calf about 90 yards through the timber, and all I had was a window about this wide to shoot through at its head. And I thought, okay, I can take a headshot. Close distance, I can make that shot, whatever. And I was looking through my scope, and I, for the life of me, could not pick up this animal. So I'd look through my scope. I couldn't see anything but vertical timber. And I'd pull my scope away. I'm like, he's right there. And I'd put my scope back up, couldn't do it. Did that about 3 times and gone. That was it. Tried to pursue him, never got back on him. A couple other instances and occurrences happened where I had interactions with other hunters. Things didn't work out for me. Other people interrupting my hunt and blowing the animals out that I was trying to stalk on. It's public land. That's how it goes. You just got to roll with that and hopefully build a plan that incorporates that. But long story short, all of those 45 days, never got a shooting opportunity. And for the last 20 days of that hunting season, I never even saw an elk. So clearly I was doing some things wrong. So then in 2016, moved to Wyoming. As in Wyoming, you have to live here for a year before you get resident status. And so as such, I couldn't just buy a tag. We didn't move till June, so I had already missed the application deadline and everything. And so I didn't hunt. I didn't hold a tag anyways. I ended up going with my dad down to Colorado for 2 weeks. I convinced him, like, hey, kind of got an idea of how this archery thing works. Let's go chase elk on an over-the-counter tag down in Colorado. Why don't we work on filling your tag first, and if we fill it, then we'll just drive back down the mountain, and I'll buy a license, and we'll fill my tag, but let's just focus on getting one tag filled first. So we did that. A week in, and we hadn't heard or seen an animal. Then some buddies of mine joined us. And on week 2, we did not see or hear an animal. We barely even saw a fresh sign of animals being around. Mind you, the week before we went down to go hunting, I had gone down to Colorado because it was only, 6-7 hours away. Drove down there and, started scouting, spotting, looking, glassing for elk. Found the elk right where I thought they were going to be. I was like, great, perfect, this will be easy, whatever. Compounding the issue, my dad ruptured a disc in his back, and so he was less than mobile, shall we say. He said he could make it, and he did make it, sort of, but we were very limited in what and how we could do things and how far we could hike, and yeah, that didn't work out for us. So basically 2016 was a loss. Thought I had a good idea, thought I had a plan, thought I figured out calling and all this stuff. One thing I didn't bank on was the fact that there would be a muzzleloader season going on concurrently with the archery season. So there were literally several hundred people trouncing through all the woods, unbeknownst to me, blaze orange out there basically rifle hunting while we were trying to archery hunt. And I did not know at the time, I didn't look at the regs close enough to know that that is what was going to be happening. So that's a lesson. Look and see what other hunting seasons are going to be going on at the same time that you plan to go out hunting, because sometimes maybe a deer season will coincide with an archery elk season or something like that, and you need to be aware of that when you're planning a strategy. So 2016, nothing. 2017 rolls around. I am now a resident. I'm like, hey, great. I'm going to get my general elk tag here in Wyoming, and I'm going to go elk hunting. Now, I may have made a mistake according to a lot of people, but I feel like it was a good mistake. I got married in the middle of September, and a lot of people will caution you never to get married during archery elk hunting season if that is a passion of yours. Fortunately, I married an amazing woman who has not made any qualms about me never being home for our anniversary since since I'll be out elk hunting. And also, she went elk hunting with me this last year, and maybe that'll go somewhere, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But if that might be something that will be a problem for you, do not plan to get married during elk season if you can help it, if you get any say in the matter. But for me, not a problem. So I went out, picked a spot, again, a brand new location. So now this is 3 years of elk hunting, 3 different locations. So the second that I think I start to figure out a location, boom, I'm in another situation. So now I'm hunting somewhat different. So brand new to the area. Again, basically looked on Google Earth, threw the dart at the map and said, that looks like a good area to hunt. I'm going here. So how it played out, because I was getting married, was I had a weekend. I had to work all week. The next weekend I was getting married. Then I got to go back to work. And then I had another weekend. That was it. That's all I got for an archery elk season in 2017. So first weekend, I go out, pick a spot. It's 90 degrees. New to the area, and I picked a good location. Look, I was able to get on elk the very first day. One of the places I hunted was a giant canyon that was maybe 500 or 600 feet deep. And it was not a walled canyon, but as steep as it could be without actually having solid rock walls. So I could actually go up and down it, but it was a bugger. And I was able to get into elk, and I made the mistake of dropping down into that canyon and trying to come up on the other side, chasing some bulls that were bugling. I learned a lesson about exhausting yourself and burning all your energy and bonking. If you've ever heard somebody say, you bonk, it's when you run out of energy and it's all you can do to get back to the truck and your campsite. I bonked. The heat was an issue. Water was an issue. You know, had a ton of stuff go wrong on me, but I was chasing elk. And so then go and get married. And then I come back, okay? So now that's 3 weeks apart that I'm hunting. And things change a lot in 3 weeks out in the elk woods. And so go back. Um, I gave up on that canyon. I'm like, all right, I'm going to hunt a different side of that canyon where I don't have to go down and across. Hunted there, and I got into a couple of herds of elk. I made the mistakes with wind again, um, but I was able to call some elk. I was able to follow them, but mainly I got out there and I was able to learn the terrain, and that's one of the biggest things. If you can hunt the same area more than once, or if you can hunt 2 concurrent days in the same area, where you can go in, and even if you're not able to get into the elk, kind of be very wary of your wind and the direction that it's going. Be aware of the thermals and the actual wind currents themselves. But if you can get around and poke around in an area a bit, especially if you know there are elk in the area, if you can figure out ways to move through that terrain that are not as steep, not as thick, and will allow you better access in and out of a location, it'll do you the most good, and it will help you be more successful because you can get to places quicker, and you'll be able to save your energy. So 2017, moral of that story was still didn't get an elk. Had literally a day and a half on one weekend and a day and a half on the second weekend to go out and elk hunt due to travel time and everything else. So no elk, but learned an area finally. So 2018, I thought, you know what? I found these elk. I'm gonna go back, right? And at this point in my career, still haven't shot an elk. This is my 4th tag I've had, and in my mind, any legal elk, which on this particular hunt, any legal elk is any elk. So I could shoot a calf, a cow, a spike, or a bull. And I thought, first thing that gives me a shooting opportunity, I'm going after it. So opening weekend, I go out, and I found an area, bulls were bugling, opening day, and I went back into the same spot I had discovered the year before, and I had studied up the entire year on elk calling. I made that a central point of my study for the entire year. I learned how to call elk. I learned the different strategies. I looked at many different strategies. This is where Chris Rowe's strategies came to play because his calling strategy makes sense to me. It makes scientific sense. It makes logical sense, and so I followed that that methodology. Still very cherry, by the way. Um, and so I started calling up. And that opening weekend, I had 5 encounters with 5 different bulls at less than 20 yards. Still no elk, though. People go, how the heck did you manage that? Well, I hunt solo most of the time. And as a solo hunter, I learned in that particular weekend that I need to call and then move slightly because they know exactly where you are when you are calling. I would call, and in less than a minute or two, I would have an elk staring me down as close as 10 yards, looking right at me with no way to draw and nothing I could do about it. And so I learned about, making a setup and how to do that, and then how to call and kind of stick and move just a little bit. You only got to move 10 yards, let's say, in order to get into a good position where you got a good setup and you can draw as an animal's coming in. But I didn't know that at the time. So I had these run-ins with elk, but still wasn't able to make the shot, right? So then 2 weeks later, I finally got a week off of work, and I was like, that's it. I'm going out for a full week, and I'm going to finally fill this tag. And I went back to the same spot, same location, got back into the same herd of elk, and lucky for me, I went out, and the very first morning, I got into 2 bulls that were on a hillside that were bugling back and forth to each other, and I couldn't see either of them, but one sounded deeper, bigger than the other. And so I thought, okay, that's the bigger bull. I'm going to go after him. And I didn't say a peep. I just got on his track and followed him up the ridge to the top of the hill. And when I got up there, I could hear him, and he was only maybe like 70 yards, 80 yards, 100 yards in front of me. So I called, I did a sequence, made a setup, and I waited for him to come in. This time, I did so after moving, right? So I made a setup where I thought he was going to come out to my right on a trail that he had entered into this thick timber on. And truth, how elk hunting always works is I had set up planning on this. He does something completely different. Instead of following that trail, he cuts out and across and comes in front of me. Luckily, my wind was perfect. The wind was coming from him to me, so it wasn't a big deal. But instead of following that trail that I had set up for, he walks through a bunch of blowdown and brush and timber and walks in to 9 yards. So he walks into 9 yards on me, and he has no clue I'm there, can't smell me, but there's nothing between him and me again because I had set up with a backdrop waiting for him to come off to my right. And luckily, he walks around. There's one tree that he walks behind, so I draw when he goes behind that tree.